Alrighty, so welcome everyone. This is our Preparing for Midterms Academic Success Workshop. My name is Thomas. I'm joined by Gretchen. We're both academic advisors at the First Year Center. The First Year Center contact information is on the right-hand side of your screen. So if you wanted to jot anything down, now would be a good time to do so. But with that said, let's jump right into this workshop. So the first thing that we're going to do is go over the traditional territories acknowledgement. The University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Métis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and the mistakes of the past, and dedicate ourselves to moving forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. Okay, so like Gretchen was mentioning earlier, this is an interactive workshop, and we're going to be using Menti to be delivering this workshop. And this is going to allow us to be interactive with each other, and we're going to be putting on some poll type questions, some voting questions, even some open response questions too. So we would really like it if you can get onto Menti for us and join in on the workshop fully. So on the right hand side is the QR code. So if you got your phone handy, you can just go ahead and scan that, and then just that'll take you right there. Or if you're on a laptop or a computer, you can go to the Menti website and enter the code that you see on the left. So we'll leave the screen up for a second here just to give everyone a chance to join in.
And yeah, once you sign in, as I can see, some people are already doing, if you can just react with the heart button, that helps us keep track of how many folks have signed into the Menti. And it's also just very cute. It's very satisfying to watch the hearts go.
Yes, more hearts, please.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we'll just give it another few seconds. I think there's a few more folks who can sign into Menti for us. And if anyone is just joining us now, I mentioned that we're doing an interactive workshop today. We're going to have some poll questions, some open response questions, and to fully get the most out of this workshop, you want to sign into a web page called Menti. You can do so on a QR code if you're on a mobile device, or you can do it on your laptop using the website and the code you see on the left-hand side of your screen. The website and the code will be up at the top of the screen for most of the workshop. So if anyone is joining a little bit late and they haven't had a chance to join into Menti, you'll be able to do so as we start getting into the questions. All right, you know what? I think we should dive right into the content now.
Sure thing. Yeah, so the focus of this workshop is on strategies to prepare for midterms. Since it's so strange to think that it's already February, so midterms and term tests are coming up for a lot of folks. And so we're going to be talking about 5 main strategies here: taking notes effectively, spreading out your studying, also known as distributed practice, interleaving your studying or adding variety, not just focusing on one subject, using visual organizers, which can be very powerful, and of course our sort of like meta strategy, which is asking for help. And we'll go over each of these in a little bit more detail. But first, yeah, we have, our first question here. So how are you feeling about upcoming midterms and tests? This really big one, really big anxious. Yeah, so the neat thing with this, this format, is that the bigger that the words are, the more responses, the more people have sort of picked that a specific emotion or feeling as a response. And I should have mentioned too at the beginning, these are all anonymous. So even though we would see these answers afterwards, there's nothing tying your specific response to, your registration. So please feel free to, be honest. I really like this semi-prepared, which seems to me a very realistic and very honest answer. But yeah, I'm not surprised
that's a good place to be. That's absolutely a good place to be, especially as There's probably some term tests coming up, like Gretchen mentioned, probably some midterms in the next couple weeks. So if you're semi-prepared, it's probably a good sign. And I know a lot of folks are anxious. So if you're feeling anxious or nervous or scared, those are kind of our big three here. You're not alone. It looks like a lot of your classmates are feeling the same way. And hopefully by the end of this workshop, a lot of people move from maybe the anxious category to a little bit more semi-prepared or even into prepared. That would be awesome.
Yeah, that's always the hope. Okay, so that seems like a lot of folks have participated in that one. So we're going to go on to this first strategy, which seems so simple and so basic, and yet it is so foundational, taking notes effectively. You'll see that one of the points I put here is actually take notes. Don't just rely on a professor's slides or the PowerPoint, which I think is actually really interesting and really important given how often I think now that we've sort of come back from online learning back in person, a lot of instructors, I think, are very willing to share their slides and their PowerPoints with students, but nothing is ever going to beat putting the information into your own words and your own understanding. The way you can think about it is that those PowerPoints are kind of a map or just like kind of like memory triggers for your professor who knows and understands that information very, very well. It's going to be very different for you coming in as a learner where that information might be very new to you. So you will probably have, even if you're giving kind of a template for notes, you're going to have to add to that. You're going to have to organize the information in a way that makes sense for your brain and where you're at in your learning. And so it's not enough to just rely on the information as it's given to you. You need to actively do some things with it. The more that we interact with information, the more it kind of becomes part of your brain and part of your knowledge. You'll see here, like this picture, these are my actual very messy notes from a meeting that we had with the stats prof. And that sort of ties into the second point here about when you're taking notes, and you've probably heard this advice before, it's really important to pay attention to meaning, not just capturing every detail. If anyone's ever worked at a job like I have, where you have to literally write down every single word that someone says, like for interviews, let's say, that can become very boring very fast, and you just become kind of a dictation typing machine. When you're in that mode, just capturing every word, it's almost like the words are going into your head and out of your hands, but not really landing anywhere in your brain. So really a more active and definitely a more energy intensive, but more rewarding way. Rewarding as in it's going to be more effective in the long run for helping you understand and remember information is even just in a setting like this right now, instead of trying to write down every single word that I'm saying, try to focus on, okay, what is important? What is the meaning here? What is the ultimate message or takeaway? Again, with a workshop like this, it's okay if you miss some of the specific words. You can always go back to the original source. With other live lectures, you may not have that luxury, but hopefully you have other resources that you can use to capture any lost information. Yeah, so that's just a little bit about taking notes effectively during lecture. Can we go to the next slide, please? Okay, thank you. And so now this is the, I don't know, the life hack, the like level 2 technique of taking notes effectively is rewriting your notes after class. And we have this note here, ideally within 24 hours after class, because something really interesting happens when you go to sleep at night. Your brain kind of washes out the information that it doesn't think of as important, and it tries to cement the things that are important. And the more time passes, just the more that memory, that information fades away. So if you can take your sort of, as you saw my very scrawled, messy handwritten notes, if like what I did afterwards, the day after, was turn them into this format on Microsoft Word. And you can see it's organized, it's easy to read, it's very condensed. I can put in stuff like charts. And it's really, really interesting because I've had classes where I have done this, and I've had classes where I haven't, where I wish I did. And in that second case, where maybe I took notes at the time during lecture and I thought, you know what, I understand this information so well. It's so clear right now. There's no way I'm going to forget it. I don't need to rewrite it. Inevitably, I would come back to it like maybe weeks later or a month later, or maybe 3 months later during exams. And it'd be like, it's like someone else wrote this. I don't understand any of this information or what I wrote down. And I would find myself having to reteach myself the material all over again. As opposed to other classes where I did this format. For example, there was a class where I was a volunteer note taker. And so I had to take notes that I knew I would be giving to someone else. So I wanted them to be as clear as possible for someone to understand, like outside of my brain. And so by the time I went back to them, these notes for midterms or for final exams, it was so much easier to study because it was like I had in advance made these study guides for myself, instead of feeling very overwhelmed like I have at other times right before midterms, being like, okay, I got to spend a lot of time just like gathering up all this massive information and putting them into study guide format. And when you do it that way, just sort of a little bit like at a time every day, you say you're like putting in that work, like that daily work, to make it so much easier by the time you're actually doing your revision. So yeah, so that's one part of note taking. We'll talk about another part of note taking, which is condensing the info from readings. And this is kind of related to trying to capture the important information. So a lot of reading for like academic texts, like textbooks, journal articles, are very information dense, very information heavy. And what you want to do to be able to understand information, remember it in the long term, and be able to retrieve it or recall it when you're actually tested, is to be able to make that information sort of as condensed, as small and essential as possible. So if we go to the next slide, we can see what it looks like. Take that information and then turn it into this much shorter form and much easier to study with, or to study from. The way I think about this too is kind of like a file on your computer, that it's so much quicker to retrieve it if it's like smaller and more condensed. And there are a lot of sort of like little tricks that are going on in here, but abbreviations, organizing with headings, having the examples stand out, using numbers, all of these are great strategies you can use to take that very dense academic information and put it into a shorter format that's easier for you to work with. And just the process of doing that, taking that dense information, putting it into the simpler form, that's a form of studying and force, because it forces you to really think about and understand that material. But yeah, so I think we have a question coming up. So this is kind of a different question for Menti. So the idea is you get 100 points, and you can assign a number of points to any of these study strategies. So look through them, like maybe read through the whole list first before you start assigning points. But what I'd like you to do is just give more points to the methods that you think are more effective, and less points to the studying methods that you think are less effective. And we'll sort of see how folks feel about these, which study strategies come out on top for this group. Like Thomas and I have, our favorites, but that's because we know, yeah, we've done a lot of reading and talking about how this stuff works. So I'm excited to see. Oh, okay, we can see some numbers coming up
We have
here
a
already.
voter. We have
Yeah.
one voter. Okay.
Mhm. No.
And you may notice as well, there's no right answer. Maybe there's a combination of answers that would be yielding the best result. And we're going to talk about why some of this stuff might be the case a little bit later on. But
Yeah.
start thinking about, hey, what have you been doing? Maybe you're a student in the fall term. What did you do in the fall that worked well? What did you do in the fall term that maybe you want to do a little bit differently in the winter term? Think about that as
Mhm.
well.
Yeah. Oh, this is so interesting to see these numbers. This is part of what I really like about Menti, is seeing the data change in real time and seeing things sort of jump around. Yeah. And it's so bad I already want to like start talking about them, but I'll let people answer.
Yeah,
I can be patient. I'll sip my tea. I'll sip my tea and wait as folks vote.
it's a close call right now. Looks like flashcards is in a slight lead, but
Yeah.
people like
And
practice
practice
testing,
testing.
and you can't forget about practice testing.
Yeah. It's so interesting because some of these strategies are so like there are bad ways to do them and good ways to do them, I think too. So that it's kind of context dependent as well. It's a more complicated question than you might think.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. Mhm.
Yeah, so it looks like just a couple more voters are still working right now. So we'll
Mm.
give another few seconds, and then we'll start talking about or making some sense out about making some sense of this list. All right,
Okay.
let's go ahead and jump forward a little bit
Shall we
and
go from the bottom?
yeah,
Should we
let's
start from that?
yeah,
So
let's do it.
I love this because I love that this is voted solo because this is actually a shockingly powerful studying technique that is not intuitive, I would say. It doesn't come very naturally to people and it isn't talked about very often. Um, it is so powerful to just like, yeah, read something, look away from your notes and readings, and just mentally recall what you have read. It kind of really goes along with summarizing or paraphrasing the info in your own words. It's actually like very, very effective because what you're doing when you are immediately recalling or trying to remember what you just learned, it's like you're already like starting to walk down a path, I think. And you, each time you recall and retrieve that information, you are making that path deeper. So a lot of, I think maybe the more natural way that people think about learning this info and retaining it is that you read something, maybe you take some notes, later on you reread it again, because I'll see that like rereading was just a little bit higher and repeating info over and over again. You think that the more times that you read that information, like say, or like read a page from a textbook, that the better you would be able to remember it. Actually, no, it's way more effective if you read that info, look away from the original source and just try to remember and recall it. It's kind of the difference between, I'm going to use a sports metaphor, Thomas, and I'm going to mess it up terribly. Um, it's kind of the difference between somebody like handing you something, like handing you the ball, to just like read information on the page, as opposed to picking up the ball yourself and running with it, which is more what looking away from the notes and summarizing or paraphrasing info in your own words is. So I kind of talk about those two bottom and rereading notes and repeating info over and over again. These are ones that they can be uh, effective if you are doing them sort of actively, if you are actively rereading, or even with the repeating info and over again, if it's spread out over a long period of time, which we're going to talk about. But generally, just repeating information is not as helpful, I will say, for university level courses as it might be in a high school context. Because usually in high school, there's less information that you are expected to retain and remember, and in a less detailed format.
Yeah.
Thomas, do you want to talk about a couple of these of these strategies? Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And you may be noticing a common denominator between a lot of them. A lot of them have to do with interacting with the material in a more deliberate sense. So not just
Mhm.
kind of keeping your eyes glued to the page, but looking away from the notes, for instance, or explaining the content to someone else.
So
Uh,
powerful. I'm surprised that one didn't get
rereading.
higher. Oh.
Yeah, it's one that you might not first consider when you're thinking about a study method, but there's almost no better way to master material than to be able to teach it or talk about it with someone else. But another thing that kind of holds a lot of these together is related to the fact that they're kind of about practicing. So when we think about interacting with the material in an active or deliberate sense, we're thinking about practicing engaging with that material. So not just having the material in writing and and reading it, but doing something with that material. And that's going to lead me into my next point that I want to talk about, which is going to come right away after this question. We want to know, before we jump into time management strategies and talking about testing, how you like to study, or how do you tend to study at the present moment? Also, no wrong answer. So be absolutely honest, and me and Gretchen will let you know how we like to do our studying and our learning. So it looks like a lot of handwriting notes for people here today, and only one person prefers doing it on a device like a computer. Maybe that's kind of surprising. Maybe after all the remote learning and online school, people got tired of looking at screens and they wanted to write everything on paper. Maybe that's the case, and I can appreciate that. I can understand that for sure. I think for me, when I was in university, writing notes by hand was the way that I thought you were supposed to write notes. I think there's a rumor that floats around that you remember information better if you write the notes by hand, and I don't think that that is necessarily true. I think a lot more is made of how you interact with the material after you write your notes. So we've been talking a lot about not just having notes on the day of the lecture and leaving it there. We've been talking a lot about rewriting, rereading, explaining to someone else. So a lot of it has to do with, whether you're rewriting it in on paper in a really neat and tidy way, or maybe you're typing it up on a Word document. It doesn't really matter. What matters is, well, are you interacting with it? You might type out a bunch of words, but if you never look at it until the day before the exam, that nice type Word document's probably not helping you. It's the same thing if you write really nice notes by hand. Maybe you did all the right work and you condensed your notes, but you never revisited that material, and now it's the day before the exam and you wrote really nicely, but you can't remember what any of this is about. Well, then you're not doing yourself any favors. So whether you're a paper writer or you like to type on a device, or even a combo, make sure you're interacting with the material. That's the most important thing, really.
And I will say to also give some, I don't know, maybe my theme is like context for today as well, that this I think really depends on your course content as well. Like it makes sense if you're doing like a math or a stats course to be writing stuff by hand and writing out equations. And in other cases, like maybe in more of like a humanities class, like English or history, it like would be easier to be able to capture notes like in a lecture scenario. So yeah, but yes to everything that that Thomas was saying. It's not just about the method that you use, but how actively you work with that information afterwards. Can we talk about practice testing? Because I'm so happy that for that ranking one, that practice testing and flashcards came up really high, because yes, it's just there's a lot of research going into and showing that like this is the most effective way that you can study and learn information and retain information. And I'll let Thomas talk us through it some more.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we talked about rereading our notes, rewriting our notes, highlighting our notes and things like that. And that stuff is all really important, but the research has found that practice testing is the single most important and the most effective method to enhance our learning and our retention. And I think a lot of that comes down to the fact that you're interacting with that material when you're doing practice testing. And it isn't to say that rereading and rewriting your notes isn't helpful. It certainly is, but you don't want to be leaving it to rereading or leaving it to rewriting. You want to
Don't
make
leave
sure...
it to highlighting. Sorry, I have a whole other workshop where I talk about how highlighting is like not effective, but that's I'll leave that for now.
We'll leave that for another day. But it's true. Highlighting might be a great start to your studying. But the question is, are you highlighting effectively? Are you being efficient with your highlighting? And Gretchen can go on and on about that one, and you will let her have her workshop on that one. Make sure you go to the highlighting workshop that's coming up. It's a good one. But as well, once we move past the rereading, the rewriting, we're starting to remember what we were learning and what we've been doing in the course, the next step is to practice test ourselves. And you might be wondering, well, my course, how do I do practice testing for my course? I'm in a writing course, or I'm in a course where it doesn't really seem like it makes sense. Well, let me tell you this, there are ways to do practice testing, and we're going to talk about just a few ideas.
Mhm.
So kind of starting up here at the top and then moving our way clockwise. So the first and probably most obvious thing we think of when we talk about practice testing is doing old tests and doing old exams. So maybe our instructor gave out some old midterms that they've done in the past, or maybe we had some quizzes so far in the course and we want to kind of have another chance at those. That's a great way to practice and interact with the material that you've been learning, because, well, those are questions that are of the same difficulty that has already been asked in the course and may mirror to some extent what might be asked on a midterm. So, after some reviewing of your course material, maybe you did some textbook questions, it's time to do some old quizzes or some old midterms to make sure that you're ready for the time of doing your actual midterm. You might be in a situation where you've done all your quizzes or old midterms, or maybe you just didn't really have access to any quizzes or midterms before your actual midterm. Well, if there's a textbook in your course, then you might have the opportunity to do some textbook problems. So especially for courses like math, physics, maybe even chemistry, courses where almost every unit there's a series of questions at the end of the chapter, something like that might be helpful, and have yourself do those practice problems. And chances are there's answers at the end of the book too, so you can make sure that you're getting the right answer. And in your preparation, if you're not, or you're struggling on a topic, you know that you can reach out to your instructor before the midterm and while you're studying for any help that you might need. Now, for our folks here today who are doing a writing course, and I've done a number of writing courses, and I know Gretchen has as well. You might be wondering, well, how can I incorporate practice testing if I'm doing a writing course, like an English course or a history course? Like I have an essay to write in about an hour. How am I going to do a practice test for that? Well, what you can do and what you should do is you want to emulate the feeling of a time pressure when you're doing a practice. So maybe you have an hour to write an essay on your midterm, and that's a lot different than having a couple weeks to write an essay for your course, right? You can do both, but you're going to be looking at different things. So you really want to make sure when you're practicing, you're giving yourself the same sense of time restraint in your practice as you would on the actual exam. Another aspect of it is, well, where am I going to be getting these questions or these prompts? Well, what I would do is I would look back in the notes in our course that we've taken so far and think about some of the topics that have been addressed throughout the course. Maybe you've been given an assignment where you go choose from 5 or 6 different essay options. You chose one. Well, maybe do a practice short essay for some of the topics that you didn't choose that you could have. Something like that to give yourself a cue to get in the mode of practicing for the actual exam day. The next few we've kind of touched on a little bit, quizzing your friends, or even, I guess the opposite would be explaining to your friends some of the course material that you've been interacting with or working on in the course. So maybe your course is a little bit more related to memorization or very dense detail. I'm thinking about like a physiology or an anatomy course. Well, maybe that would involve having a friend ask you some questions about the course or quizzing you on the flashcards that you made while you were studying. And the last one that we have here is turning headings into questions. So maybe you're really not sure how to start practice testing for one of your courses, and then you look at your course outline or your course syllabus. You see all the different units that are going to be covered in the course and what the outcomes are for those units. Well, you can look at them and ask yourself questions based off of those learning outcomes, and to make sure that you have the information at hand and be able to replicate that for an upcoming midterm.
Can I Also, yeah, that's also very helpful for like textbooks, or for readings to be able to turn some of that material into questions. One technique that I think is kind of nice too that combines flashcards and quizzing your friends is if you make up question banks together and have that like collectively. So each of you has to do a certain number of questions. You can swap them around, test each other. That's a strategy that like I used with my friends when we had a test that was like, you just have to know these 60 terms, that we would just break it up between ourselves. And that was a really nice way to divide the work, in a way that was still like, following academic integrity. I'll just note as we're going on to sort of the next few questions that we are at 3:32 right now.
Totally. So we're about halfway through, everyone. So now I'm going to steer it back to you. So we talked about practice testing and revising notes and condensing our notes. We want to know, when it comes to actually getting our study done, how do you like to approach it? Do you like to study in a large study blocks, like maybe 3 or 4 hours at a time? Are you someone who maybe does like a medium length study block, maybe an hour or two at a time? Or do you like to study in shorter blocks, like 30 minutes at a time, maybe taking some small breaks in between? Okay, so it looks like we have a number of people voting so far. It looks like the consensus number one this far is the 30-minute at a time small break study method. It looks like some people don't mind a medium study block, so maybe an hour or two at a time, and no one wants to study for 3 or 4 hours at a time.
Or not that many
Well,
folks. Yeah.
Someone is
Strongly agree
someone is
with that.
so contrary and voted for that. Maybe you have the attention span to study for 3 or 4 hours. We're going to talk about which of these are helpful, generally speaking. We're going to talk a little bit about the research, but we'll let folks who are still thinking have a quick second to vote.
Yeah, and I'll just note that if you joined us partway through, that you can answer these questions by going to menti.com and using the code that's at the top of the slide there. Yeah, that'll let you interact with these slides and see them on your device. So, yeah. Oh yeah,
Yeah.
can we see some of the breakdown? Can you hover
Oh, we
over?
can.
Yeah.
I didn't know we could do this. That's awesome.
Yeah, it's fun. Yeah, so a
So it
lot of
looks
people
like there was a
strongly
couple
agree. 30
people, they
minutes.
don't like studying for 30 minutes at a time.
Mhm.
We had 6 people say they do a
Mhm.
lot, and a couple people, I guess,
Right.
mostly agree. I think that's what it is.
Mhm.
So this one's pretty even. Not a lot of people have strong feelings, except for a few people really don't like studying for an hour or two at a time. That's not the
That can
fit.
be hard. It's hard to focus for that long of a time period. Yeah. And then we have a
And
lot of people strongly disagreeing with the 3 to 4
not
hours. That's
surprisingly
very
there.
demanding.
And that's maybe a good thing. And we're going to talk about why. We're going to talk about why. So before we get to that, though, we talked about how long we like to spend studying, maybe a short period of time, long period of time, but we also want to know, when do you like to study? So are you like a morning person, early afternoon, the sun's still up, you want to get your work done? Are you a nighthawk? You like, you get home from campus, you have your dinner, and then you open up the laptop, you get all your work done. What works for you? And I can tell you from experience, firstly, I just want to say there's no right or wrong answer when you get your work done, completely up to you. As long as you do it, really. For me, I started my university career doing primarily most of my homework well into the evening, into the night. And that probably was out of necessity, not necessarily out of preference, because, well, let's just face it, my time management skills weren't where they needed to be. So I needed all that time. As I progressed in my university degree, got a little bit better at scheduling, got a little bit better at time management. Well, all of a sudden, getting my work done in between classes in the morning or the afternoon seemed to be a little bit more feasible. And I didn't really need to rely on the evening or the night. Now, that's kind of what worked for me. Again, there's no real right or wrong answer. We just kind of wanted to see, when do people actually like to get your studying done?
Yeah, and people have different circadian rhythms, and this is determined by classes as well, where like most classes are taught between like, let's say like maybe 10 a.m. to like 4 p.m. during the weekdays. I learned very early on that I do not do well with 8:30 courses. That was a very harsh lesson in my first year. But one of the really powerful things that this question makes me think of is trying to plan your tasks around your energy, not necessarily the time that you have available. Yeah, taking advantage of those times when you know you're going to be more alert, more awake. Thomas and I talk a lot about the afternoon dip where you sort of crash after getting stuff done. But yeah, can we talk about spreading out our studying and distributed practice?
Absolutely. Right. So we want to talk about something called distributed practice. You might also call it spreading out your studying. The opposite of this is massed practice, also called cramming. We've all heard of cramming. So let's just call it cramming for today. And we all know what cramming is. You sit down and you spend 5 hours doing the same subject, and you're not getting up until the subject is done. Now we can say that distributed practice or spreading out your studying in a smaller chunk, in a more repeated chunk, is a lot more effective than cramming. You might be wondering why. We're going to get into that a little bit more, but essentially it all comes down to, well, when we're cramming and we're going to sit down for 4 or 5 hours, the human brain doesn't like to work that way. It's very
Yes.
difficult. And you've probably noticed this, and a lot of people voted that, well, I don't like studying for 3 or 4 hours at a time. And that's probably because your brain doesn't like it. It's uncomfortable for one thing. It's hard to motivate yourself when you know that, well, I've committed myself to 3 or 4 hours of biology. That's a lot of commitment. But you've also probably noticed that after about half hour, 45 minutes, your ability to really pay attention and to really absorb your material diminishes really quickly. And that's kind of why we wanted to get a sense for people like studying it in a medium time length or a short time length. And the reason is, well, research does suggest that studying in a small period of time, like 25 or 30 minutes, taking a small break and then studying another part of that course or even another course is actually a lot more effective, both in terms of memory retention as well as in terms of time efficiency. And that's really important, especially because the likelihood is you're preparing for a couple different midterms right now. So you don't have time to get stuck for 2, 3, 4 hours on the same course, the same problem, and you're tired and now you're on your phone, you're on social media. You don't have time for that. You need to be kind of keeping yourself to a little bit more of a high energy pace, incorporating some small breaks within that. And we're going to show some illustrations, some calendars as to why this is a little bit more effective.
Yeah.
So on our screen now, we have someone who they like cramming. They want to do cramming. So
I
they got
I,
arts
I bet
11
they probably
coming
don't
up.
love cramming. I bet I my strong guess is that they feel forced to this because
Good point. Good point. Yeah. So
yeah.
they don't love cramming, but they do cram because they didn't come to this workshop and they've never heard of spreading out your studying before. So now they're going to study all day Wednesday and Thursday for the arts midterm, and then they're going to study all day Saturday and Sunday for the stats midterm. And then the moment that's over, they're going to do the bio lab report. You get the point. It repeats, and this is really hard. This is really hard on the brain. You're going to give yourself a lot of stress. And then behind the time that Thursday rolls around and the arts essay is due, you probably barely remember what was on the stats midterm, and that's not going to help you when it comes to final exams either, right? So this is probably not the most efficient use of time. Your brain won't like it, and while it may work, especially in high school, at the university level, this is probably not the best way to manage your time.
Let's talk about some alternatives. Yeah.
Let's absolutely do that. So I've been talking about spreading out your studying and distributed practice so much. So essentially, even when you spend the same amount of time doing, if you cram for 3 hours versus studying in 30-minute blocks and you take small breaks and then it counts to 3 hours, it's more effective to study in smaller chunks. I'm just going to show you on an illustration here. Well, this person, same stats midterm, arts midterm, the same things, except they're kind of cycling through material in a more frequent basis, and they're kind of budgeting for some breaks. So this is the way that you want to be doing your studying if possible.
Yeah, there's a lot of benefits to this. And I feel like one of the questions we get around midterms and finals a lot is, oh yeah, and you guys can go ahead and start answering this question at study breaks while I blather a little bit. Um, like how do you balance having multiple exams or midterms or assignments at the same time? Because it is really hard to just, it's not often that you get the luxury of being able to focus on just one thing. And so the distributing the practice, doing a little bit every day, spreading it out over as many days as you can, it just makes it so much easier, like, and so much more sustainable over the long term to balance multiple courses. Yeah, okay, so I'm seeing some good like answers coming in here. Yeah. TikTok, so dangerous.
TikTok's big
Um,
these days.
yeah,
Uh-oh, that's
yeah.
okay.
K-drama, yeah.
Yeah, closing a walking,
Mhm.
it's healthy. I see some people like, well, one person likes to do that. Okay. Uh zoning out, dissociating, yeah, taking your mind completely off things is good too. And I think key is when we know we're taking a little bit of a break, maybe we're taking 5-10 minutes off, we want to make sure that we have a little bit of a timer going or something to hold accountable for that. Because, well, if we're studying for 30-minute chunks and taking small breaks, but our small breaks become big breaks, we're probably not being as effective or efficient as well, right? So we got to make sure that we're holding ourselves to somewhat of a calendar or a time schedule. I'll share from experience. When I was in university, I found that the ideal time split for studying to break was 45 minutes of work and studying to 15 minutes of break. This
Mhm.
wasn't the same for every course, and this definitely would be while, maybe not in the first week of studying while my brain isn't quite there, but as I got into it, that was the perfect length of time for studying where I was efficient the whole time and I was working the whole time. And that was a perfect length of break just to keep me fresh. So that's what worked for me. What has been studied is what's called the Pomodoro technique, which is 25 minutes of work and then 5 minutes of break. So that I modified that for myself. And maybe as you get going on your midterms, you start finding a timestamp that works a little bit better for you. Um, so I just wanted to mention, hey, you know what, if 25 and 5 doesn't feel right to you, it doesn't have to, that you can kind of make it work for you a little bit.
Okay, so we're at 3:44, so I'm just gonna try to like whip through the next two strategies real quick so that you have time to, yeah, ask questions, fill out that survey. But we're also going along with sort of distributing your study. We're going to be talking about interleaving your studying. So this is talked about as opposed to block practice, which you can think of is just studying just studying one subject very in depth for a long time, as opposed to interleaving is studying multiple subjects or in one subject, maybe different types of problems. And I think, yeah, it makes sense more if we look at the visual description of this. So this is our kind of example to go along with that previous calendar of this is what your study session might look like for an evening or an afternoon instead of spending all this time, let's say, working on Arts 1110 essay. Essays especially can be huge time sucks and just suck up as much time as you let them. Maybe instead, like you are sort of limiting yourself, putting boundaries and saying, okay, I'm only going to work on this for, the 25 minutes, half an hour, 45 minutes, then I need to move on to the next subject so that you can keep up with all of those different courses. And it's really interesting how putting those time boundaries around things is very helpful. It's so easy, I think, to procrastinate when it's like, I have all evening to do this, to work on this essay, as opposed to, okay, I have to see how much I can get done in the next half hour or next 45 minutes. And our brains, like, there's really interesting stuff about interleaving, but our brains actually really, they kind of learn better when we switch topics, which is also kind of counterintuitive or not intuitive from how we would think that learning works. So the example that we have here is for math. And let's say, you want to spend the whole evening just focusing on one specific type of problem, solving the same kind of problem over and over. So that's probably good when you're first learning a new topic and you need to become familiar with it. You kind of need to do like a whole bunch of similar questions in a row. But after you've learned something, a different way that you can go about it that incorporates incorporates interleaving is now when you're doing problem solving, doing problems from different units, different topics, different times in the course, kind of all mixed up together. So you have some variety. And this is how flashcards work as well. It's part of why using flashcards is so effective. When you, in that first scenario, let's say where you're solving questions that are all the same type, you don't have to work as hard to figure out, okay, what formula or what type of question is this? It becomes very automatic. So it's kind of like a step is cut out for you. It lets part of your brain be a little bit more lazy, as opposed to if you have a lot of different questions on different topics kind of mixed up and jumbled together, which is more likely how you're going to be tested on a midterm or a final exam. You have to spend some time with each question thinking, what kind of problem is this? What kind of formula do I need to be applying? And so it really exercises that problem and like develops that problem solving part of your brain. A lot of the themes I'll say that we talk about when we talk about prepping for midterms or exams is you want the way that you study to match up with the way that you're going to be tested. If your whole test is not going to be completely on one subject, but going to be like questions out of order from multiple topics, then it makes more sense to study in that way so that you become familiar with it. And that can reduce some of the nervousness and anxiety around it too, that you're not being placed in a completely new situation in an exam setting, which has higher stakes because there are marks. You've gotten used to it in your more lower stakes everyday practice. So it's something that you're already familiar with. Yeah. And can we talk about when we want to talk about visual organizers, which is something that I really love and part of the reason why we have a lot of little visuals sort of seated throughout this workshop. Um, a lot of the information that we receive, a lot of it is text, a lot of it is words, right? But visual organizers can help us in so many ways because humans are largely very visual creatures. I just think of, really cool infographics that they get across the meaning and the relationship between different pieces of information in a much more effective way than the same information just presented as words, right? And one of the things about this whole idea of visual organizers helping you connect different pieces of information and putting that information into a meaningful whole, into like a meaningful big picture, is again, it makes that information easier to understand and easier to remember. And I will say that information is sticky. It likes to cling to other pieces of information. We tend to chunk and put things together. And using visual organizers can really help with that. So let's go to another example. So again, like talking about stats. So this is directly from the stats website explaining the difference between stat 1000 or 2000. So this is a classic example, just kind of, a whole bunch of text, a lot of words. So what we can try to do is take information like that and turn it into even just a very simple visual like this to see, okay, this is the relationship between this information. You can take one stat 1000 and 2000, or you have this alternative pathway for courses that you can take. And again, I would much rather study from this. I get a lot more from this diagram rather than from that wall of text. Just the process of turning that information of that into this, it forces you to really understand and think about how those pieces are connected. We can look at some other examples too of visual organizers. So I'll put one into the chat. There's a handout from, okay. Oh, and I'll also put a video about interleaving into the chat as well. I've just been popping some things in there as we go. But the ALC, the Academic Learning Center, which we'll also talk about, has a great handout with examples of graphic organizers. But I really like this example too, especially if anybody is taking a course like physiology this term, which has a lot of memorization, a lot of terms, or maybe like Bio 1030, even language courses. Like I think of charts like this that I used when I was taking a Japanese class, is to organize information into a matrix or a spreadsheet and seeing how different types of information are related to each other. There's, one type of learning and working with the information that is just putting it into this format. and seeing how information is organized. But you can do other things like you can hide a column and try to sort of fill in the blank for yourself. That's a form of recall, retrieving information. You can sort information by different columns so that you see different kinds of relationships between the same information. Because guess what? That might be the kind of questions you're asked on an exam. It might be the same information that you've received before, but just asked in a different way. I think that's where maybe some of the nervousness about like exam questions can come to, where it's like, wait a minute, this isn't what I learned, or this isn't how I learned it. And so kind of the more ways you can look at information in different ways and see those deeper relationships, the better you'll be able to anticipate the way that things might be asked on an exam. Pro tip, there are very few cases where professors actually put in like trick questions. It's often more that, okay, this might be kind of a mismatch between the way that it was originally taught, or the way it was explained in the textbook. So,
Yeah,
but yeah,
they like to really hone in on like minute differences. So
yes.
anytime you see little like
Yes.
numbers like 23, 46, well, if you take a biology course, you know what all this stuff means, but you want to be paying close attention to anytime there's like a small difference between different things. And that's where charts like this and kind of flow charts, visual organizers can become so handy, is because you're associating a fact with a certain thing, and you can really visualize the difference between two things. So come to the day of the
Mhm.
test, you're not so surprised, or you don't feel like it's a trick question, because you've kind of already been learning the difference between one or two or more things, right?
Mhm. It's usually not the big differences between topics that trip people up on a multiple choice test. It's usually the small differences between very similar concepts. Yeah, so that's where the visuals can be, and things like a spreadsheet can be helpful. So we have this question coming up. So this is our last strategy, and we said it's kind of a meta strategy because it ties together a lot of different things. But where do you go for help when you experience challenges with your studies? So you have different things here, like instructor, teaching assistant, TAs during their office hours over email. We'll talk a little bit about tutors from the Academic Learning Center. Maybe people have tutors outside of the ALC. Yeah, lots of resources and supports. Mhm.
Yeah, so it looks like a lot of people take advantage of classmates asking your classmates, "Hey, do you understand that?" Or "Oh, did you catch what the instructor meant by this
Mhm.
example?" or something like that.
Oh, I'm so
Um,
glad to
yep,
see people are accessing the librarians. Yeah, they're a fantastic resource. Yeah.
totally.
Mhm.
Let's see here, and a lot of people are using the ALC tutoring service, which is really good to see, and TAs for sure, TAs and instructors.
Mhm.
They're a part of your course. They know exactly what material has been taught. They know, what's going to be very important for that material. And of course, they're masters of the material themselves, right? So that's a very good resource for you to go. And what we want you to get from this is, if you're studying, or you're having a hard time, definitely ask for help, reach out to someone, and that's really the most important thing that you can be doing for yourself, other than maybe just spinning your wheels over and over again. You want to make sure that you're reaching out, be that a tutor, a teaching assistant, instructor, a librarian. Maybe you're having a hard time finding sources for a essay or something like that. You want to make sure you're asking for help.
And I'm just going to say thank you to the person who was very honest and said I'm too shy to ask for help, because again that was me as a first year student. I was the very last person in my like 6 credit hour English class to actually go to the professor to ask for help during office hours. But the story I have around that is that like when I was a student, especially a first year student, I thought that if I asked someone for help, they would think I was dumb, or maybe I wasn't like trying hard enough, that like I should have understood this already just on my own, because it's university, you're expected to be independent. And then later on, when I became a teaching assistant and people came to my office hours, my thoughts were always, oh, this person is like really engaged, they really care about their learning. I'm so glad that they came in and asked for help, because this shows me that they really care about what they're learning. So just to have that little bit of a flip might make it a little bit easier, to reach out to those folks. And we're going to have sort of our last question coming up is because we've talked about a lot of strategies here, but of course we've only focused on 5 main ones. So we were curious to know, do you use any other study methods besides the ones we've discussed or that we've mentioned that are effective for you that you'd like to share with the other people in this workshop? There are lots of good strategies out there. And we are getting to 3:56. So yeah, after this, I think maybe Thomas will just do like a very quick plug for Academic Learning Center, the summary, and then
Yeah,
we'll show the survey. Yeah.
totally. Yeah,
Active
you know what I
recall.
I think after this, I'm gonna just jump right to the survey and we'll give
Okay,
everyone a chance to get that done before 4 o'clock.
sure thing.
And then we'll talk about active academic learning center. And then we'll get into some questions. So if
I'll put
folks
a
do
link into
have
the
some
chat
spare
for
time,
Academic Learning Center if people want to check out the
perfect.
resources. Forest, yes, I love Forest. So good, such cute. If people haven't used Forest, it's a timer where you can set like a certain amount of time. It can be like 20 minutes, like 40 minutes, half an hour, and you're growing a little tree the whole time. If you exit the app to check Instagram or something, the tree dies. So it's very satisfying growing a little forest of trees. And they introduced this new sort of stopwatch mode where if maybe it's just for like you want to see how long you can go without checking your phone, it'll go into that mode where you're growing a tree, and there are certain apps that it'll block that you can't look at when you're in that deep focus mode. Yeah, okay, awesome. People talk about teaching our friends what you're learning, which we also mentioned with like going along with the practice testing. Um, Life Eat IO. I don't know or Life at IO. I don't know what that is, but I'm gonna look it up because I always like hearing about new apps and stuff. Let's see. No. Oh, neat. And so it also looks like it's for focusing and productivity. Nice. Yeah. Mhm.
Awesome. Well, thanks for sharing these. We're always like to see what study methods folks are using these days. So like I mentioned, the Academic Learning Center is a place where you can get workshops like the one we're doing right now, but you can also work with an academic tutor, whether that's for course content, maybe you need some help with study skills specifically, or maybe you're in a writing course and you want some feedback on your papers while you're drafting it up, or on an old paper and you want to know how to improve. So I'll leave this up here for a quick second, and then we're going to dive into the survey and give everyone a chance to leave a review and leave some feedback for us.
And I will stop recording here.